Welcome to today's program hosted by ISM New Jersey. I would like to say a big welcome to all of our ISM members and guests to today's show. Please be sure to ask or place any of your comments, ask any questions or place any comments in our chat function or our Q&A area. We would like to make this an interactive event and we want to hear from you. We definitely want to hear your questions. Today's topic is really important. It's procurement's role supporting the company's ESG and sustainability initiatives. Such a hot topic. I am pleased to welcome back Graham Crawshaw, who is the Services Director for CASME, and he's from the UK. So welcome, Graham.
Thank you, Kathy.
Graham has the overall responsibility for the quality of CASME's Global Roundtable and Virtual Events program. Prior to joining CASME, Graham spent 20 years working in procurement for the music industry within an operational and marketing environment. At EMI, Graham regularly supported major artists, including the Beatles, Queen, Pink Floyd, in developing and sourcing their unique packaging requirements, and subsequently worked in the company's first music streaming contract. Graham is also a fellow of FCIPS. I will now turn the program over to Graham.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy. And I always like that welcome that you give me. Really appreciated that. On one of these days, we should do an event on the music industry. So maybe, but not for today. We've got a different agenda for today. So delighted to be here. The plan for this next sort of 55 minutes or so is, very briefly, I want to set the context, say where the information has come from that I'm going to share with you, and that's from the CASME network. Then specifically talk about sustainability and ESG, but from the perspective of really supporting procurement, as opposed to you hear many sort of presentations about sustainability, ESG. I want it from a perspective of what procurement is doing, and then sort of finally just sort of summarize all that up for everybody. Set the tone. It's important that you understand where this information comes from. CASME, we're an organization, membership organization, and we're all about different events and networking that we put on. And we do that on a global basis. And from those events, those roundtables, panel discussions, we produce different meeting reports and notes, and then support that with different benchmarking that we carry out across the membership. So we've got a great source of information, and it comes from procurement category managers around the world. We are global, and I think that's important, and to respect the fact that procurement varies depending where you are in the world. There's a different level of maturity, there's a different way of working with suppliers, and that does change depending where you are. So having that local perspective and building it into a global position, I personally think is very important. And as Kathy says, having been in procurement all of my career, I'm one of those unusual people that really has focused on procurement, but I find it fascinating to see the differences depending where you are. And I think in terms of ESG, that is even more important because it does vary. There is significant difference, and what we're seeing is that change going on as procurement recognizes it as a hot topic and wants to really add value to the business. That's where we do our events and benchmarking and networking. The companies that make up the CASME community, you can see on the screen here, they're typically large global organizations that have got procurement teams in different parts of the world. And again, I like to share this slide. It's just a few of our 225 members. I like to share it because it gives you perspective. It gives you the understanding that it's not just from one sector or one type of organization that is the CASME community. It literally is different organizations that do different things. They've got different levels of profitability, different sectors that they're working in. Put all that together, and you really do start to build a real good understanding as to what is going on within the world of procurement. But my last slide about CASME, and the one that personally I think is most important, is the fact that everything that we do supporting procurement is done without influence of suppliers, sponsors, or consultants. Back with my procurement hat on, I think that is so important, because you want information that's credible. You don't want someone selling you anything. You want to be able to read or have information presented and know that it's come from a credible source. Everything I'm going to share with you from now onwards has come from that community of almost 15,000 category managers from those companies. And I think anyone that's joined any of my previous presentations to the New Jersey chapter will know that I sort of make a big deal of this. But I think with ESG sustainability, it's even more important. There's a lot of hype out there. So actually hearing about it from procurement and the challenges that procurement faces, I think is really important. And what I'm going to share with you is the approaches that procurement is taking. And I'm hoping that the very practical nature of it will be of help. Please use the chat or the Q&A, so I'll try and answer any questions that I can on the topic. But that's the plan. Let's get into what we're actually here to talk about. Now you know the credibility of the information. Sustainability. I think anyone that's just been around reading the procurement press, attending conferences, it's the buzzword. ESG. It is a buzzword that we hear so much about. And I think because it becomes a buzzword, you've got different organizations, different people always wanting to talk about sustainability. So we actually said to our members, look, let's almost put aside what you know. What really is in understanding, the interpretation of what you understand the word means. And I think this is quite a good summary that we collectively came up with, that when talking about sustainability, it is that program designed to make a significant and lasting improvement to the impact of the business. And I think those last few words are on the environment. And I think it's almost unfortunate that we've used the word environment with hindsight, because actually it's the biggest environment. It's the biggest scope that you can think of. It is that impact that procurement can make on so much of what it actually does. But I want to pick up on those lasting improvements that need to be made. And that is really what we're trying to do. It's not that short-term thinking. It's a long-term change that really is going to make a difference. And I think that's where procurement's coming from. We are in a position that we can influence and make those changes. And the conversations we have with suppliers puts us in a perfect position to do that. So that is what I'm saying is sustainability, and trying to keep aside some of the buzzwords that we hear. The terminology has changed. And I think for anyone that has been in procurement a long time, not only have we got the buzzwords, but we also know how things do change. We spoke 10 years ago about corporate responsibility. We've then moved more recently to go on about sustainability. But then over the last, I would say, only 2.5 years, we've got the overriding umbrella of ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And it's coming together. And it's interesting. I think we've got a long way to go, because we tend to focus on the environmental side, maybe a little bit on the social side, but probably less when it comes to the governance. There's certainly not 3 words that are treated equally and balanced. But nevertheless, ESG, you're hearing all over the world now. And I think that's also another fundamental change, really, since the start of pandemic. You've got that understanding being sort of discussed again globally, not just in one location. I would say that generally in Europe, and often led by legislation out of Germany, you've always had that broader influence on the environment and wanting to make procurement and activities more sustainable. And that then really seems to have sort of carried on and rolled out, I think, followed by the US and then followed by other countries. I mean, it's still the case that you go to many countries within the APAC region, and it's definitely nowhere near as advanced in terms of that mindset, that working way of working with suppliers. So often it gets translated to being about recycling and doing those sort of activities. So there's a long way to go, and it is very much a journey that we're all on. But I think procurement is very well positioned in order to be able to add value. See, ESG is definitely growing in importance. So as I said, we've done a lot of benchmarking in terms of trying to understand what is really going on. How important is ESG when it comes to procurement, and also then the organization. And I think this chart's a particularly helpful one. We will be sharing the slides, so don't worry about the detail if you want to look back on some of these. But it really confirms that we know that we've got that heightened awareness of ESG. Everyone is talking about it. So actually, it's also a good one for procurement to be involved with. I think it's also very much a top-down influence that the organizations are working more because they are being encouraged to or demanded to by senior management. And I think that also links to a very good point that I've seen very recently, and that is procurement has got to play its role, but it can't work in isolation. And I would say if you've not got that top-down support from procurement, from the business, then you really are restricted as to what you can do and the progress that you're going to make. And in fact, you shouldn't be trying to take on the burden of doing this for the whole organization. Procurement's got to almost define where it works and where the boundaries are there. I think there's a tendency to try and do too much. So those of you that perhaps are struggling on it, I think that should help sort of put it into perspective. We know that there have been the CSR reports that are now generated by so many organizations. And I think we've gone through that phase of trying to really demonstrate that we're doing the right things. We are still prone to greenwashing. And again, that's been a subject of the COP27 presentations that are going on this week in Egypt. Greenwashing, you've got to be so careful. Some of the statements that you're putting out there and making to the business. Nevertheless, I think without doubt, ESG is growing in importance, and that's becoming more and more popular. Let's talk about the scope, because I think one of the things I hear an awful lot from procurement is the challenge of what actually should be included. It can be very easy to almost not know where to start and where to stop. So this was benchmarking that we carried out earlier this year to really understand the scope from procurement. What are you working on now? What are the projects that are most likely to be incorporated within an ESG agenda? When you look at the list, we seem to have really matured in terms of focused on areas connected with risk. So the whole sort of concept, that environmental concept that we had of seeing the projects as like, oh, supporting those sort of almost environmental extremists, that's gone away completely. The link now with ESG is so close to risk management that really the two go very much hand in hand. So there on the chart, you could see this is what procurement is telling us. I'm not going to read it out. I hate death by PowerPoint. I hope everyone can see the slides. If not, we'll share them with you afterwards. In terms of some of the details, it's a question, well, where can procurement start to make a difference? And what I'm hearing is companies doing specific projects and then telling the business what they've done. Typically, procurement is not good at saying it's done a fantastic job. We get nervous. We aren't really that confident because so often if we've been talking about cost savings, there's a level of nervousness that the business may not like the fact their budget could be challenged. And so it's a whole sensitive area. But when it comes to ESG and environmental matters, I think it's a great area for procurement to make a lot of noise and really make the point when something has been achieved, providing that it actually is positive news and isn't greenwashing. And what we're seeing within CASME are these projects that many companies are doing. Some of them are still quite basic, and it's all about just doing things and making that known that the work is being done. Others are much more sort of fundamental in terms of change. And in fact, since even producing this slide, what I've seen is when you look at some of the work around electricity and natural gas, because of the significant increases that we've seen in cost, now more projects are viable and could be justified to progress in those areas. So demand management, having greater efficiency. So looking at the return on investment of those projects is also something that I'd now add to the list. Other areas, the elimination of single-use plastic. That is one that's been talked about, but has yet really still to be implemented in so many organizations, because often it's that tier 1 or even tier 2 supplier that has to conform to what you're trying to achieve in that area. But those are some of the other areas. When talking about fleet, very controversial in terms of electric vehicles, but I do know many companies are considering adopting that. And in fact, we've just done some benchmarking in that area. But the whole story of how environmentally sound they are when it comes to batteries and all the impact of dismantling at the end of the life cycle still means that just implementing EVs may not necessarily be the best way forward. I think we're still waiting also for the infrastructure to support that. But that's almost story for another time, specifically looking at fleet. We asked our members that sort of, you hear that you've got to do something. And I've been telling you that it seems that procurement is perfectly positioned to do something, but there's got to be an objective. You've got to have a reason for wanting to do these, because let's face it, we're all crazy busy. And the cost savings, the cost avoidance, all the work that we're doing through supply chain disruption, it does almost make you wonder whether sustainability is going to take a bit of a backseat. Well, actually, I think it will. And we've done some conversations and benchmarking that indicates, you know what, some of the pressure is off ESG projects because of all the other volatility that we're seeing in procurement. But the view is that because those projects have got such a long lead time and objectives need to be achieved by maybe 2025, 2030, that actually you could afford to take the slight sort of pressure off achieving some under that ESG banner. So again, fascinated to know whether that is the situation for your company, or whether you are under pressure still to deliver in this area. The objectives, though, some really good ones here, looking at the reason why procurement would step up and want to deliver when it comes to sustainability. You notice again that link with risk. And what we're finding is that because that risk is something that you cannot really define in terms of a dollar amount, you are more likely to be able to get the attention of those that are making decisions at the most senior level, because risk is so important. So actually riding on the back of risk is something that we're seeing a lot, that then forms that objective for a sustainability program. Again, compliance, a lot in terms of that governance. There's a lot of legislation coming out or has come out. And if you think whether it's modern day slavery, whether it's GDPR, whether it's some of the other legislation that really is covering that governance, we've got the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, the changes that are necessary in Germany that will be coming out. There's further legislation in the EU next spring. And all of this legislation then has a knock-on effect around the world. We know the GDPR impacts in the US and also in Latin America. So the lot does come under this sustainability banner, but linked with risk as well, including brand reputation. And I think from conversations I've had, that's a relatively new one, that procurement can play a very strong role in supporting the corporate brand and making sure that your company's name isn't going to appear in some newspaper because of something that's happened that perhaps is causing embarrassment. We talk about point of sale or merchandising items with company logos on. That has been a concern for quite some time. So it tends to be a project that people really do focus on. But that can go, the reputation and the damage to brand can go way beyond a t-shirt or a football or something that's got a company logo on. So what are the objectives? If that's, let's put some data behind this. And when we did some further benchmarking, again, on a global basis, we wanted to know what are the objectives that you've got for your specific program. And you could see here the regulations, the support in terms of regulatory requirements and legal requirements is number one. Then preventing risk. So whichever way we cut it, whether it's direct benchmarking or whether it's through conversation, we're getting that same feeling from procurement. This is why fundamentally we're doing this. It's not really for sort of the good of the planet, if you like, and that's probably quite a controversial statement. I think that goes alongside it. But from a procurement perspective, it's understanding what's going on to be able to really help manage the risk and support that. So what is procurement's role? And I really did want the detail here, because you can really go off at a tangent if you're not careful. So we wanted to understand, first of all, internally, what is procurement most likely to be doing when it comes to ESG? And you could see some of the points here, and I'll just call out a couple of these. I particularly like the education and influencing. I think the work that we do with suppliers, the knowledge we've got of the marketplace, is such that we are in a really good position to be able to educate or influence, and you could use either of those words, whichever makes most relevance to your situation. But I think understanding impacts and sharing that with stakeholders, I'm also told by many organizations that actually stakeholders like that information. They'd like to hear it from procurement because they know it is credible. They know that it's come from the supply base. And it also makes quite a good talking point. So you don't just have to keep talking about cost savings. So it's a really good way for procurement to get in, learn and explain and communicate to the internal stakeholders information you've gathered from suppliers on these areas. In terms of external, then again, we've got quite a responsibility with those suppliers that may be not so advanced or not engaged with ESG programs. So we're in that pivotal role that we can sort of play it on both sides. Collaboration with suppliers. That's what we're good at, let's face it. That is really what it's all about, listening and understanding from suppliers, what can we do that is going to make a difference? And it tends to be, my experience from all the conversations I've had, it tends to be those small projects that really do just build up, get people talking, and then make a difference. So some examples there. And I must admit, we often come back to packaging as one area to develop. And more recently, what I've been hearing is it's not about the packaging of your own product, if you make products yourselves, but it's the packaging of products that are coming into your organization. And that's covering both direct and indirect procurement. It's amazing just the amount of corrugated that is received into, or just is part of the supply chain process. And interesting, we see all the commodities that have been very volatile over the last few months. The majority, the peak has been hit, and we're seeing the majority of commodities coming down, maybe slowly, but corrugated is the one where that whole supply-demand balance is really causing a challenge. And prices are holding up. There is shortage of supply, and it's a challenge to most organizations. So I think that also is a reason why it's a great one to have for consideration on the sustainability front. But I said it's often an easy one. Many people are doing that anyway. I want to talk about some of the tools and systems that are being used. Can I just remind you that I said at the start of this presentation, at CASME, we don't work with any suppliers. We are completely agnostic. Suppliers would love to work with us, but we don't. We don't want to have anything that will compromise the quality standards of the procurement information that we have. And I say that because you may think that this is going to turn into an EcoVadis advert. And I promise you, there's no way that's going to happen. But it is fascinating to see the lead that that company has when it comes to tools and systems to support ESG. You can see some of the other organizations that are used for also supporting and helping companies to monitor. But it is staggering the grasp, if you like, that EcoVadis has on this whole area. How long that's going to continue, not sure, but I think it's just worth being sort of aware of that. And I'm not saying anything negative. I'm just sort of presenting it as facts. Equally, I'm presenting this as a statement of fact. Because we said, look, we keep hearing about EcoVadis. What is so great about this company? Why is it that people are using them? And these are the answers that we got when we asked that specific question. I say, not supporting them at all, but it is a statement of fact. People are saying it's easy to use. It helps reduce the time to get the information that you need. Information is reliable, and it works. I think that's the message. It just works. It provides you those alerts that you need for supplier performance. Again, really interesting in the chat or comments from anyone, whether you agree or disagree, but this has come from a lot of people that are using EcoVadis as a tool. It's not all good news, because one of the fundamental processes that are supported by EcoVadis and other tools is it's all about collecting data from suppliers, collecting information from them. And that in itself is quite a challenge. And we specifically said, okay, well, what is the downside, or where do you struggle when it comes to surveying and getting information from your suppliers so that you could report it internally? Now, we know how many suppliers that a typical company has within its AP ledger. It's not easy. There's a lot of work to be done. Suppliers and procurement struggle and talk about survey fatigue, the fact that it takes time to get suppliers to actually provide you the information that you want. Some suppliers frustrated by it, and the comments that, yeah, they're not necessarily taking it seriously, or they're taking it as a tick box exercise, which obviously isn't good and is the last thing that you want, because you want the quality data when you're capturing that. Then it takes time to analyze the results and get something meaningful from the data and keep up to date with all of that. So for those of you that are doing surveys, the bad news is I haven't got a solution. I think the only positive is to be aware that surveys do play an important role supporting ESG. They are being used by a lot of organizations, but they're not necessarily the only way or the best way to get information to support what you need to be able to run your program. I'm also asked about KPIs. We love KPIs in procurement, don't we? We know we've got to measure it, we've got to report it. If it doesn't get measured, is it going to get done? And where again on earth do you start with key performance indicators supporting sustainability? So we asked the question. We just said, look, what are you actually doing in procurement to report what you're achieving? And so we sent that out to, and we had many responses from across the CASME membership. And so we just summarized this. And what you see on the screen there are the top KPIs that procurement is saying is useful to really track and manage the projects that we've got going on. So again, not sure whether you are doing something similar, whether you find that of help. It's not necessarily easy to get the data in order to populate and produce the reports from these KPIs. I think that's also a very valid point. And as we go into looking at scope 3 emissions as they are, then arguably it gets even more complicated, and understanding more about your suppliers will need that analysis. And that also then needs to be reported. Getting definitions, avoiding greenwashing, that's so complex in this area that I think we're just sort of hoping that it does become clearer and we get consistency of what is required on a global basis. But I do know a lot of companies are struggling with this at the moment. But those are the KPIs that our members are saying this is what they use to report their sustainability activities. I'm also asked for external sources. Where can you actually get extra help and support? And so we made that also into a question on our survey. What are you finding of most value to give you that knowledge or to engage you better on ESG and sustainability? So again, when you get a copy of these slides, please just take a look at that information. Where's all this going? I think that's the other point. Now, I haven't got my crystal ball out. We don't really know. And my personal view is when I see all the government and world leaders in Egypt really struggling to make things happen, it just shows how complicated it is. But I think in procurement, we're perfectly positioned. That balance between internal stakeholders and suppliers. We've got that ability to ask the right questions, gather the knowledge, and then sort of translate that to what our internal stakeholders are looking for. And I think that particular role that we also play in so many other aspects where we're adding value to the business through procurement, that's one we can play with ESG. And so where is that going? I think we've got a long way to go. But what I'm seeing, and when we ask this as a questionnaire, it seems to be that we've got to get that alignment better, working stronger to get that sort of strategy aligned with what the company is trying to achieve, and also what our suppliers are able to offer and provide to us. So interesting, the role that we play. I mean, we talk about here change agents, and I think that is very true. We are about encouraging and making that change for the good to help achieve some of these objectives on sustainability. I meet a lot of companies. I work and talk to so many companies. And I think the last point on this in terms of future trends is quite a controversial one, because I think I always ask the question, how serious are you taking all that we've been talking about today? And a good way to understand that level of seriousness is to understand, what are you doing when it comes to weighting your suppliers who are responding to tenders or requests for proposals? And I'm seeing quite a distinct difference between, putting it bluntly, those companies that play lip service and really want to achieve just a minimum of token sustainability or token ESG commitment. They are either having zero weighting or maybe up to 5%. There is an increasing number of companies that is actively saying every RFP we issue, the weighting for ESG criteria will be in that 15 to 20% weighting. And I think whenever I hear that from an organization, a procurement function, I think, you know what? Yes, you are taking it seriously. You're saying that you are assessing all of your tenders and allocating 20% or close to around sustainability in ESG matters. And that then cascades all the way down, because you've got to know what you're weighting and the questions that you're asking and the reporting that goes along with that to make it work and to make it credible. But once the suppliers know that that weighting is significant, it does make a difference. You're not just doing a tick box exercise. You're not just doing it to generate a report, but it really does matter whether they get the business or help to get the business. That's when, my experience from talking with companies, that's when you see a difference. And they are actively putting forward suggestions and ideas that are going to help you achieve some of those objectives that we've been talking about. So I personally think it's a very practical way of moving forward, and procurement contributing to the ESG and sustainability agenda by doing the things that we've been talking about, getting those projects in place that really are incremental and collectively are going to make a difference. I think I like to sort of sum it up by this slide. It is about procurement telling, explaining, training, educating, and really shouting about some of the projects that have been done under that ESG sustainability banner. It's about having the RFPs in place with that level of weighting. It's about creating awareness and letting suppliers know that you are taking the subject seriously and it is going to make a difference. And then when you've got that in place, you can then start to reduce certain areas, and these areas, and I'm going to add in the utilities. So energy, water, very much a hot topic at the moment, and an area that you really can make a difference. Get those efficiencies. Since the pandemic, of course, we're seeing a lot of companies actively review their travel policy, typically getting ESG criteria within those as well. And within logistics, of course, you've got the whole supply chain challenges that we've been facing. So I think that's the summary. I think procurement is getting together well. There is the German-led Sustainable Procurement Pledge. That organization that is run by procurement for procurement has grown rapidly over the last 18 months. And I'm keeping a very close eye. Anyone that's not familiar, then spp.earth. It's headed by the CPOs of Henkel and Bayer. And you can get some really good information from them as well. You've got to make sure that it doesn't get too academic. That's the only point that I would say. And I think what I've tried to present to you today is very much this is what procurement is working on now and is helping to move forward with the business. Let me stop sharing there. Those are the slides that I wanted to go through with you today. And as I say, they're all from conversations, from roundtables, panel discussions that we've had with procurement professionals. So you may feedback, you may have a question or comment that actually you consider yourselves either much more advanced or maybe not so advanced. But what I've presented is the summary from literally 225 companies as of really the fall of 2022. So it's very, very current thinking. And that's the status as we see it. So I hope that's been of interest. We'll share the slides. You can look at the data. Kathy, let's see. I don't know if we've got any questions from anyone. I'm always keen at this point. I know I feel that the way that we've got the system set up with Zoom, I always feel I'm like talking to everyone, and I don't get the opportunity to get some feedback. So I always do welcome any comments or questions, the extent that you disagree or even agree with some of the things that I've been sharing today. So yeah, that's where we are. Matthew, look at your comment there, just in case anyone can't read it. So an advocate for change. I think that's what procurement is almost becoming, isn't it? We're all about that change in the way of doing things. And it's great. We're not talking about cost savings. Anyone that joined my presentation on inflation will know it's almost impossible to be talking about cost savings. It's very much about the cost avoidance. You made the comment, Matthew, going green is not cheap. And I think this is a role procurement has got to play. You go back 10 years and you remember looking at like even office stationery, and the suppliers there were offering different alternatives. They're allegedly high environmental credentials with some of the products. They always carried a premium. Now, as we move to looking at office products now, you'd laugh if you were to suggest that some of those credentials would mean that you needed to pay more. And I think this is what we're seeing in the broader sense of sustainability. It should not cost more. Arguably, the conversations you're having with suppliers should actually help eliminate some waste, improve the way things are done. So I think at the moment, I would agree, there probably is a cost premium. You look at some of the energy costs, any energy contracts, there is a cost premium. But I think we should be working to get that down so that it doesn't warrant that premium. And I think that's going to be achieved by procurement, having those conversations with suppliers. So yeah, thank you, Matthew, for your comments there. Anyone else got any questions or comments they'd like to put in the chat? I can see that.
We do have one.
Yeah.
But it is not really about savings. Is it about value and growth?
You know what? I don't think procurement can be about savings going forward. I think that's the fundamental shift we need within the business. And I think almost what we're seeing now with all the volatility of commodities and inflation and interest rates, I think it's at last time for the business to realize procurement's value can't just be about cost savings. If we achieve cost savings, great. It's got to be around risk, this sustainability agenda. It's got to be around the work of making sure that you're compliant with modern day slavery requirements, for issues around other sort of governance and ethics. It's also got to be about bringing the innovation and really working with suppliers to make sure that your supply chain is going to not only work today, next year, but genuinely is sustainable, with the meaning that we need it to work for a very long time. And we've got to think more long term and move away from that short-term thinking of trying to achieve cost savings in this current fiscal year, because that is what we're going to do to get a bonus or a salary increase. So I think now is a critical time for procurement to be taking that on board. I know it's easy for me to say. It's going to take a collective movement. The change agent, as Matthew says, that collective change of procurement to gently nudge us towards that direction, so that when people hear procurement, the first thing they're thinking of is, oh, that's the function that makes sure we're buying sustainably, that is going to ensure we comply with legislation, with data, GDPR and all the other areas. And only at the end they say, oh, and they also deliver some cost savings. Yeah, okay. Yeah, reputational value. And I love your point at the end. That is how the organization will grow. That's what I think is what it's all about. And I think what we've built through the crisis that we've seen, whether it's been the pandemic, whether it's been the Ukraine war, the energy crisis, the inflation, we do seem to be going from one crisis to the next. But procurement is doing well at supporting that and still delivering. But I don't think it's cost savings. I think it's all the other value that that we can deliver and support. So yeah, hope that that's certainly the insight that I am seeing, and the excitement that's being built up from organizations really keen to work in this area. And I think sustainability, from the benchmarking we've done, is probably the hottest topic in terms of the value procurement can actually offer. But as we've explained, or I've shared with you, it's about having those objectives so that you actually deliver what is going to be of benefit to the company, and not just get swamped because it is so overfacing and it's unclear where to start and stop with these projects. Kathy, I've been talking for probably 48 minutes. I'm not sure whether we have got any questions. I always welcome the feedback.
We do.
We
Okay.
do. They're coming in. Sorry, I can't always see on my screen. So thank you for making sure I don't miss anything.
Okay. Have you seen any successful strategies increasing the weight of CSR criteria? If so, can you share an overview? Perhaps there is another department procurement can partner with to strengthen the messaging around the value of sustainable sourcing.
Okay, great question, James. Thank you for that one. So have we seen any successful increasing the weighting? So that I'm hoping you're talking about that weighting of up to 20% on RFP and tender documents, because that hits home. The business knows that is the level of weighting. That demonstrates you're taking it seriously, and it certainly hits home to suppliers when they know that is the approach that you're you're taking. So I think, yeah, that's definitely in terms of successful strategies. I think what I'm seeing is companies just saying, you know what, we've got that top-down commitment. We're going to say procurement's role is building that weighting and justifying that weighting in the documentation that we're sending out, the tenders that we're running. If your senior management says, oh, 20% is far too high, or even 15 is far too high, then it's almost back to push back to say, well, hang on, what do you want us to achieve here? You've got to almost sort of put the money where you're talking to make some of these things happen. In terms of other departments, well, what I am seeing is that you've got a number of the larger companies have typically got dedicated ESG functions, and they're dedicated to sort of support the business. And that's where procurement can work closely with them. I think that's relatively new. You're not necessarily seeing that. I mean, so much of it has been with marketing, corporate communications, the PR. And that's why I say that you've almost got to get away from the greenwashing, just the reporting. So for those larger organizations that have got those functions, then yeah, procurement can work very closely. My experience, though, is that many organizations are relying on procurement because of the great relationships they've got with suppliers. But I think other businesses, other functions are keen to ride on the back of what we're sort of also trying to do. I don't think there's any one particular one, but I think we also know, and I haven't spoken because I'm hoping you're sort of familiar with this, we've got the pressure from investors, we've got pressure from employees that want to be working with companies that are doing the right thing. They say it's an important point when it comes to recruiting talent, to get people to be aware that the company is taking ESG seriously. So I think actually you can get a lot of individuals who are very supportive. And I guess that then does make it easier for procurement. It's the usual thing, get a few people that really do support you, and then you can work with them and make a difference. So yeah, I hope that that helps. Procurement's got a great ability to do the positioning and also then be that that change agent. Don't try to achieve everything tomorrow, but I think do take those projects that are going to enable you to promote what you're doing. I know a number of companies that take over the staff restaurant, the screens, the TV screens outside there, and actually put up some objectives that have been achieved by procurement, not talking about cost savings at all, purely focused on the ESG and sustainability criteria. And those sort of things definitely help, whether you've got a company newsletter, however you communicate within the business, really have it focused when you have achieved something, even if it is as simple as eliminating single-use plastic within your restaurant, your canteen, and moving to wood-based cutlery rather than plastic disposable. People like these stories. So yeah, hope that helps, and I've been able to answer your question. So yeah, thanks, James, for confirming that one.
Thank you. Wow, this was a great presentation. Thank you so much, Graham.
Thank you. You're very welcome. I'm glad that that you've all found it of interest. And you know, I like talking. I like to talk about this. I'm personally very passionate. I am a member of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. Check it out on LinkedIn. I know they're hoping to get 1 million procurement professionals globally on as part of that program. It's been made a charity, so it's a great organization. And so do sort of anyone that's got that interest, if you want information from procurement, supporting procurement in that detail on ESG, then certainly that is a good way to capture that and get that information.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, this was great. Thank you so much. And I'll tell you, you know, my mind's blowing over all the information that you've given us, and it's just there's so much out there to do.
There is, but
Yeah.
take it a step at a time, and then
Right.
you'll be fine. I think that's almost my final message. Don't make it over-facing. Don't think I can't achieve what is it, net zero by 2030 tomorrow. It's all about just going in the right direction and making things that collectively will all come together. Then you will achieve those sort of really significant objectives that companies like to promote.
Definitely, definitely. Well, thank you very much. I want to say thank you to our audience for participating today's program, and all those that put in comments and questions. We really appreciate that, because that's what really makes the program successful. At this point, I'm going to close out the program. I'm going to say, have a great week, everybody, and we will have the recording probably out to you later today. Thank you so much,
Excellent.
everybody.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye.